Right, so welcome back to Seaweed and Stingers, the Poppy Water Alliance's science podcast. My name's Nicole Corbett, and today I'm here with Alex Megerly. Today's episode is sponsored by Commonwealth Chemical Specialties. They are more than just a distributor, they are your partners in water treatment. Discover the difference by visiting commonwealthchem.com. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Eric Fisher, Chief Meteorologist at CBS Boston WBZ News, and the author of Mighty Storms of New England, Hurricanes, Tornadoes, Blizzards, and Floods That Shaped the Region. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, this is very exciting. Yourself and the WBZ team do so much in terms of the community outreach and bringing climate science education to the public, and we're very excited to have you. You cover weather across Massachusetts.
Hmm.
Uh, Today, much of the interview is going to be focused on your involvement with meteorology and the shifting climate in our coastal areas, because that's definitely something that we've been noticing. A lot of people concerned about beach erosion. That's definitely picked up over the last couple of years, especially on the south-facing part of the Cape. Um, and just the different weather phenomena that have been going on. But if we're all ready, we can jump right into this.
Yeah, let's dig right on in. I think when you're a meteorologist, you have a natural kind of interest in just the environment around you. So it's an easy fit to be a little bit of a jack of all trades between weather and a lot of the other environmental sciences and issues that are going on.
No, absolutely. Thank you. So let's start with a little bit about you. What encouraged you to become a meteorologist and study meteorology?
It's kind of that thing that I just mentioned. It was just spending time outside. Yeah, I think if, you're a fisherman, you're a lobsterman, you're even a contractor, anyone who works outside, you spend a lot of time looking at the sky and worrying about what's going to fall out of it. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors. I grew up in Western Mass in a pretty small town, and my family had a small orchard in northern Connecticut as well. So just a lot of time fishing and camping and playing around in creeks and, all those sorts of things. No devices back then. I mean, I'm not that old, but old enough where there's maybe Game Boy and Nintendo at some point, but not much more than that. So there wasn't one defining event. Yeah, a lot of meteorologists have like the day, the storm, the hurricane, the tornado. I don't really have that one day. I just know that I was always interested in it. There were some notable storms when I was a kid. There's a big tornado out in Great Barrington, Western Mass. That was on Memorial Day in 1995. We had some big snowstorms back there in the early 90s. You had the March Superstorm, you had the blizzard of 96. I was a little young for Hurricane Gloria, but I have vague recollections of that. And of course, Hurricane Bob and the perfect storm. These are all things that were kind of going on when I was younger. And so I have yearbooks from like second grade where kids wrote, "Oh, see you on TV someday." So clearly I was already talking about it when I was 8, 9 years old. I took all the science classes I could, going through middle school and high school, and I went to college with the intent of being a meteorologist. So I went to school for atmospheric science at Albany, the University of Albany, and then I got lucky. Back in the day, when you're an old guy like me, you would send out tapes. You'd basically record yourself trying to do a weather forecast, even though you hadn't done it before, and you put on a VHS tape and you just mail these envelopes out blindly to TV stations around the country, and you'd hope that someone would call you. And one station
Oh,
called me, and it was the one that was in my backyard in Springfield. So that's where I got to start.
Nice.
that's super cool. I had not thought about what the process of actually getting a job in meteorology looked like. Um, but funny how it worked out, the one right nearby. Where did you go from there? I imagine it took some time to build up to the position you're in now.
Yeah, I think things in so many ways have changed so much in a very short amount of time. So I started this 20 years ago, and 20 years ago is a good amount of time, but you wouldn't think it'd be too crazy in the way things have moved. But just in the time, those few years in Springfield, it went from sending VHS tapes to, burning a DVD. And then it was just making your YouTube page. By the time I left there, people were just putting their links on YouTube and sending out your link. And that's kind of how it works now today, too. You might have an agent, you might not, but you put a clip online on Vimeo or YouTube and you just send it around. In terms of where I went after that, I did 4 years in Springfield. When you're usually at a smaller market, you do all sorts of things. It's like just shy of,
Hmm.
changing the oil in the live trucks and doing whatever's needed, cleaning the bathrooms. I would do the weather. I anchored. I did reporting. That included on like arson and fires and other
Wow.
news of the day. So that was an interesting experience. But then one day out of the blue, my agent called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in interviewing at the Weather Channel?" I said,
Oh,
"That sounds amazing. Yes, I absolutely would love to fly down there." And that worked out. I got to go down, interview, got the job, worked there for a few years. And that's like weather boot camp. You get to talk about everything when you're covering the whole
Mhm.
country.
Right. That's awesome. You already touched on the next thing that I wanted to ask, which is just exactly what a meteorologist might do when you're not in front of the camera. I feel like for most people, including myself, I don't really think about meteorologists until they're telling me what the weather is, right? But that's only a small portion of your day, I would think.
I think that's common in so many parts of life now. I think we're all specialized from a very young age, whether it's sports or career. And you really only think about or learn about the things that really just affect your day to day, right? The things that are important for your job or taking care of your kids. But everything else
Mhm.
is a little bit of noise. You might kind of pay attention sometimes, but we all have our little avenues. And so if you're a meteorologist, your day would kind of look like this. You would start out, I wake up in the morning. Sadly, this is next to my bed, my cell phone. I pick it up. I look at all the computer models from the night before. I make sure things are going the way they're supposed to, see if anything changed. I look at the satellite, surface obs. I want to know what I'm walking out the door to. I am perpetually shocked. I shouldn't be at this point, but I think it's getting worse of how many times I leave my house and I'm like, what are these people doing? People are so unprepared for the day. No clue what's going to happen. Like it's breaking my heart. My job is to
Mhm.
predict the weather and try to make your day as easy as possible and make sure you're prepared. And I see people all the time that clearly did not spend 2 seconds trying to figure out what the day would be like. Which I guess that's just human nature. And, like we just said, not everyone's plugged into the weather. Just because I am doesn't mean anyone else might care. So I look at the models. I'll try to get the day started. I get my boys off to school and try to work out. But all the time, I'm usually, there's models coming in all the time now. So I'm just keeping up with things, answering any questions that might come in on social media. I'll come into work around 2:30 to 3. When we get in, we forecast first. After I make my forecast, I make our graphics. So we make all the graphics that you might see on a TV newscast. And we're on a lot these days. So we're on from 5 to 6:30, and then there's a little dinner break. We're on from 8 to 9, and then there's a little break, and we tape some stuff at 9:30, and then we're on from 11 to 11:30. And if the weather's busier, severe weather, snowstorms, we'll be on more than that. So most of the upfront work happens right at the start of the shift, and then it's just tweaking things as you go.
I feel like with the
So,
snowstorms, you guys are almost on continuously.
Forever. The snowstorms are they're like marathons. And people say, like, isn't it ridiculous? Like you got 10 inches of snow and it's New England and it's January and you're on all day. And I say, yeah, it's completely ridiculous, but we wouldn't do it if people didn't watch, and people keep
That's
watching.
right.
So
Mm-hmm.
people seem to think that that is interesting and valuable. And as long as they do, we will be here to make sure they have whatever they need.
really
Yeah.
neat to hear. Sorry, Nicole, did you
Oh
want
no,
to
you're
jump in?
good. You're good.
It's interesting to hear about the other skills that go into it, like you mentioned, social media and graphics. And I'm curious, narrowing in on social media specifically, thinking about questions that you've received, have you seen those change at all over time? Are people asking you the kinds of things that they were when you started in this role, or has that shifted?
It's a lot of the same stuff. I don't think there's been a huge change. I mean, social media platforms change, so the types of interactions might, evolve over
Mhm.
time for better or worse, depending on, where you are, where you're spending time. I try to be there for people, and try to answer questions as I see them. Sometimes they get buried and sometimes you miss a few, but as long as someone's
Yeah.
being generally kind and curious and looking for information, I will try to help them. If you're being a big fat jerk, I'm probably not going to respond to you because to heck with you. Um, and that happens too. That happens a lot. Anyone who spent a couple minutes
Mhm.
on social media knows, yeah, that's part of the game. In terms of the questions, though, a lot of people are just like, I have X plans. I'm looking for this Saturday. I have a road trip. I have a baseball game. When is this rain going to move out? When are the storms going to pop up? Like it's all the usual forecast stuff. And
Mhm.
to me, it's nice to know that people come to you, but also, to be honest, it's also frustrating because the answer
Mhm.
to every question is usually just watch a weathercast. Like they're two and a
Right.
half to 3 minutes long. If you watched one, you would have your answer for 95% of every question that we get. And I'm always a little bit, wondering about where's the fine line between offering up too much information for just giving it away on
Mm,
social
Mm,
media, because my job is not to talk on social media. I
right.
could just not do it at all. My job is to be on TV and deliver all that information on television. If people don't watch, I don't have a job. So there's a fine line of how many questions you're going to answer, how much information you're just going to post on the internet, and how much are you just going to kind of leave out there to hope that people will look to you on your day job, your actual job on television, and watch a 3 minute forecast. And really, at the end of the day, that's what I hope a lot of people will do. Spend a little time, because weather is a conversation. It's usually not just a one-liner. It's a dialogue about how a day might change.
No, for
mm,
sure. Do you think it's becoming more people are trying to become more amateur meteorologists on social media? I've noticed it seems like winter gets a lot of hype on social media and people saying this is going to be the blockbuster winter. The next one's going to be the blockbuster winter. And I feel like there's a lot more of that these days where you see a lot more people trying to hype up things. And maybe that's because of the prevalence of social media and other
Absolutely.
services today that,
Yeah. I mean, if 12-year-old me had the tools of today, I'd be doing the same thing.
yep.
I was, calling my friends up and telling them about the snow day forecast, and now I would just fire up my YouTube channel and do whatever I felt like doing because you're 12 and you
Hmm.
can.
Yep.
There's lots of other people who do that too. So it's been kind of interesting. I'm very aware that a lot of people think the media is very sensational, and they're out there just looking for clicks, and that's a narrative that a lot of people hold. And everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I think it's become kind of interesting that we are, I think, the sane voice in the room now. I mean, most of our time is spent telling people to
mm,
ignore the nonsense on the internet. And we're just trying to help you. Can we please help you? Please don't pay
mm.
attention to this ridiculous post over here, this crazy YouTube channel. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm sitting over here being painted as the guy who's hyping up a snowstorm, but I'm just telling everyone to ignore the hype about a snowstorm. So
Mm,
it becomes an odd situation to be in, but that's the way social media has been developed. It is now incentivized to say the most ridiculous thing possible, and you will get attention and paid for being the most ridiculous person around. And until that changes, that's the way it is.
Yep.
And I think that people ignore your greatest superpower. I think the greatest superpower that every single person holds is to be able to ignore things. You can ignore things.
mm,
Mm.
People don't take the opportunity to ignore things nearly enough. I think we stress about and think about and dedicate too much of our mental resources to nonsense that really is just out there to make you angry or to make you confused. If we
mm,
exercised our power to just say, that looks stupid, and not listen and not pay attention and not click, we might all be a little bit better off.
mm.
For sure. And I would get less disappointment from students saying, I heard that we were getting 20 inches of snow and there's only two on the ground and I planned my snow day.
Whether it's weather or anything out there on the
Yeah.
internet, if it sounds ridiculous, it probably is. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the long and the short. And I mean, we're
Hmm.
never, I feel like we actually have some responsibility to try to get it right. And we're not
Hmm.
going to all the time because that's weather, that's predicting the future. But we would never put out a forecast for attention, intentionally knowing it won't happen.
Right.
That my
Mm.
life is miserable when that happens. If I don't get something right, it's awful. It ruins my week. It ruins my month. Like I just sit there and feel sad about it. I let people down, and you just get an avalanche of crap from people on social media and emails. Like, I don't want that. I have no interest in that kind of engagement. I just want to be right. So I hope that people, I think the biggest thing we can do is earn trust. If we can earn some trust as a forecaster or as a news anchor or reporter, that's the most important thing.
Alex, you
Makes
could probably
sense.
speak to that for sure, being a former journalist.
A little bit, yeah. Very different audiences and reach, obviously. But yeah, I worked a little bit of time as a reporter for a local newspaper on the Cape.
Mhm.
Um, and there's definitely an interesting interaction, yeah, between you want to help people and you want to spread truth, and sometimes people just don't partake in the service that you offer, and there's
No,
nothing you
like
can do.
How do you monetize normal and reasonable?
Yeah. It doesn't sell.
Unfortunately, it's really tough. It's really
Yeah,
hard to do.
Hmm.
absolutely.
You collectively need a reasonable and logical and kind of boring but does the job movement. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like,
Hmm.
I try to make weather kind of fun, but that's the lane I like to be in.
Hmm.
And I'm just hoping that it holds for a little bit longer. But I would need more people to just say, you know what? Some things are better when they're just a little bit boring and they do their job.
Mm,
I hope
absolutely.
I'm
Sure.
not that boring when someone's listening to a forecast, but you get what I'm saying. I don't need
Yeah.
to act like a crazy person to get someone's attention and deliver the news.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Um,
Continuing,
oh yeah, go ahead, Alex.
sorry, I was going to say, continuing with the theme of alternate media forms, but a very different one than social media. You've written a book that
Mhm.
rather than forecasting the future was looking back at the past. So, what inspired that, and what takeaways did you have from that process?
Yeah, it was an interesting little project for me. It was something that I'd kind of thought about doing in the past, and out of nowhere, a publishing company sent me an email one day and said, "We would like to write this book. Um, this is the name of it. We already know. We need an author, and we were wondering if you'd like to write it." I said, "That sounds fun. Yeah, absolutely. I'll give it a try." I was mostly just used to like writing snarky tweets, but I figured I could hopefully figure it out. My wife is a writer, so hopefully she would be able to fill in any blanks and help me along the way. And as soon as I started doing it, COVID started. So actually, the timing
Oh,
worked out pretty well because all of a sudden we had a lot of free time, and that was my
right.
project during it. So looking up some historical storms, getting more background detail, and just kind of picked what I thought were some of the 20 most interesting, biggest storms in New England history or weather events. Obviously, that list could be hundreds of events long, but this is kind of like a gateway book for people who are interested in New England weather, and you at least want to know a few of the big ones before you dive a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. Thinking specifically about Cape Cod, how many or any of those storms and weather events impacted the Cape specifically?
A lot of them, a good share of them, and sometimes in different ways. I think that one of my, weather isms for New England weather is whatever is happening on the Cape, the opposite is happening around Boston. On a
Mm,
lot of days, if it's sunny and mild on the Cape, it's cloudy and stormy around Boston. If it's, the opposite, sunny around Boston, it's probably cloudy and foggy on the Cape.
Mhm.
And it just seems to work kind of in tandem going back and forth between the two. So some of these storms were big snowstorms for inland areas, but they were big wave creators and destructive storms at the coastline. Some just affected the coastline and didn't affect inland areas at all. I'm kind of
mm.
curious, as Cape Codders, what do you guys think? What do people consider the biggest events there? Is it the snowstorms? Is it the hurricanes? Or is it just the ones that are the most destructive with wave action?
Hurricane Bob continuously pops up. Um, but I was too young to remember Bob. I would have been maybe a year old. Um, that one pushed the sand from Popponesset Beach back in a quarter of a mile to the homes back there. And that's the one that I think is the one people most recently
Mhm.
remember as being the big storm. But now that one's starting to date back. Now we're going over 30 years. And I think that one's fading from the memories because we got more and more, people moving to the Cape who weren't there for Bob or can remember Bob. Um, so I think that one is always pops up. Not as much in the terms of snowstorms, but I will say a couple of the storms last year with the erosion piece, I think people are getting people a little bit more concerned.
Alex, what
Um,
do you think?
yeah,
I would agree. I only moved to the Cape about 3 years ago, so I can't speak to a lot of the historical side of it. But just in the time that I've been here, pretty much what Nicole said, a lot of the things that jump out to my mind are the instances that moved sand or really affected the coastline. Thinking specifically about Mashpee, the town that I covered, um, there's a beach section that just continually needs replenishment of sand, or it would just be gone. And then thinking about things like stormwater runoff as well. water quality obviously being a big concern for a lot of people on the Cape. Those two things felt to me like they were in the public consciousness a decent amount. But as for the historical things, I was in New Jersey, so I got
Oh,
Irene
okay.
and Sandy.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say you got Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I think in terms of the most calamitous types of storms, hurricanes are probably number one. But as
Mm,
Nicole was saying, it's been so long. The last time New England had a hurricane was Bob, and we're at 34 years since that. That's a
mm,
long time without a hurricane in New England. So it is starting to fade a little bit. I think people are forgetting how destructive these storms can be and that they're
right.
gonna happen again probably soon because
Hmm.
kind of ticking. So when I look back at some of these, I think the ones that stuck out the most were some of the bigger hurricanes. So we looked at category 3 or higher storms mostly for this one because those are just the highest end storms that we get here. And there's only a handful of category 3 hurricanes that have made landfall. The
Mm.
most recent were Carol and Edna, and they were back to back in within 2 weeks. Can you imagine what I would be doing, what life would be like, what everyone would be doing? Two category 3 hurricanes in 2 weeks, and one just missed us in between those two. So that was a really rare circumstance. But now that's been 1954. We're going on 71 years since we had a
Wow.
major Category 3 hurricane. But when we get these, I mean, this is the type of storm that keeps us up at night. Like if you ask a
Mhm.
meteorologist in New England, what's the biggest thing you worry about? It's the next big hurricane because it will be the most impactful. It will last the longest. It will be the costliest. It will change the landscape in some areas. It's
Mm.
just what these storms do. And sometimes you get lulled into a little bit of complacency because there are gaps. It's interesting when you look at hurricane activity up and down, the United States coastline, it tends to cluster. So there are certain periods in time where hurricanes are repeatedly seeming to make landfall in some of the same areas, and then they kind of move on. And I don't know what the great explanation for that is, but I just know that it is. If we look
Mm.
back, the 40s around Miami and South Florida had a number of very strong hurricane landfalls. And recently, in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, it's been the Gulf Coast of Florida and over toward Louisiana that things have really clustered. And for us, our big cluster came in the 50s to early 60s, at least most recently, where we had storms like Donna and Carol and Edna. We also had a couple other tropical systems. We had Connie and Diane that caused huge flooding in there. So that was a very active period. And then it just kind of went away for a little while. And I think that when we actually do get a hurricane again, I mean, my bet would be we'll probably get a few within a five,
Yeah.
6 year period. I think that the cluster will repeat. We'll probably deal with it several times. And then all of a sudden, no, we're going to become Florida. There's a lot to consider because Florida, once things got busy again, we've seen what happened to their insurance industry. It's
Hmm.
collapsing. You can barely insure a house in Florida anymore. And we've been a little bit spared from some of these huge insurance changes. I mean, obviously, our rates are going up, but it's not been whether canceling or not issuing policies like they are in Texas and Florida and California. And I feel like when we enter our next hurricane period, it's going to be our time to face it. Um,
Mm.
I mean, these storms will cause
Mm.
tens of billions of dollars in damage. The Cape and the South Coast are very built up compared to the last time we had a significant hurricane.
Mhm.
It's much more wealth in the way. And so it will be a big change event for us here. So the hurricanes stick out to me in the book. A couple other ones that go back are we had the Gale in 1815. There's a colonial hurricane in 1635. We covered all those. And then the hurricane of 38, which is kind of the trademark hurricane in the last couple hundred
Mm.
years around these parts. And all were very destructive storms. So it's just a matter of time before we get back into that type of pattern.
Mhm. No, and
We
it's
wanted
definitely
to,
concerning.
absolutely, we wanted to ask you about this idea that the Cape is Massachusetts are sort of overdue for a hurricane. So you read our minds on that one. Um, you mentioned the increase in development. Is that the major difference between the concerns in the past versus now, or are there other things that we have to worry about today that we maybe didn't have to for Bob or previous storms?
Yeah, I think it is a concern for sure. I mean, if a storm just hits, when a storm hits Western Louisiana, do you hear much about it? Not really.
Right.
There's
Right.
not a lot in Western Louisiana.
All right.
When a storm hits, New York City, you hear a lot about it because
Hmm.
there's a lot of people and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of dollars in the way of those storms. So building up certainly is part of the story around here. It's also just more stuff to be banging into other stuff. When a storm comes, it's going to be
Mm,
throwing debris and chucking boats and all those sorts of things. And so that can cause damage on its own. At the same time, I think we're more equipped to recover from storms. We've seen how some of these places, within a year, they look the same as they ever did, except for less trees. The trees come back eventually as well. So, I think there is the ability to come back, but we're also entering an era where we don't really know if the federal government's going to help us out. You know,
mm,
FEMA's allegedly going away. A lot of cuts are happening when it comes to government funding. So who knows? A lot of these big storms, sometimes they immediately sign the disaster declaration and they rebuild right back and they have those funds. And I think that's a bit of an unknown right now, whether or not that would be available to us. So that's a bit of a concern. And obviously, sea level rise has come up. So we've seen sea level rise of about a foot since when Bob came in. And a foot doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of houses are built to a high tide level or a mean high tide level. And a foot can be the difference between on your lawn or in your living room. So for anyone who has a house on the
Yeah.
Cape, that's a big deal. And obviously, when
Mhm.
we have big storms, they erode the beaches. That just makes you more vulnerable for the next storm.
100%.
definitely.
And we have pictures of, Papaneset Beach from when my mom went down there. It was down there in the 60s, and my grandparents were there in the 50s. And you can see actually the difference where the water was versus where it is today.
Hmm.
And just those couple of storms during that year and a half period where we had a couple of those inside runners that
Yeah.
had those winds that came in from the south, the amount of erosion those did, and those were not hurricanes by a long shot, was insane. So, you know, the next big hurricane, I think, is definitely something to be concerned about, especially with the amount of just erosion from smaller storms like those.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider too is that each one is a little bit different because as the
Mm,
coastline changes, the vulnerable areas change as well.
right.
The sands can open up in different spots. We've seen in different storms with the Chatham bars, they start to open up in different places or they seal
Mm-hmm.
back up in different places. So all of a sudden, erosion areas shift.
Mm-hmm.
As that kind of broke up between the bars in Monomoy recently over by Morris Island, they're losing sand like crazy all of a sudden just because that
Yeah.
little shift in a barrier beach
Mm-hmm.
and boom, things start going away. So every storm you can't really compare that one will be just like the next one.
Right.
And if your water was up in your yard and Bob, well, you factor in some of that sea level rise, and you can kind of get an idea where the next similar storm will be. But especially if you live in some of these bays where water backs up into the bays, those
Mm-hmm.
are our most vulnerable places when it comes to
Right.
a south wind event.
Yeah, no, for sure. And already there's some homes that are in these bays that are being protected by barrier beaches, and they're trying to hold on to those barrier beaches the best they can because of how close the homes are to the water.
Yeah,
And
sorry, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say storm surge is probably our biggest concern.
Mm,
You mentioned have things changed, and I do think one thing that really has changed for the better are building codes, and it does
mm-hmm,
make
Mm.
a huge difference. It really does. So now the availability of thicker windows or hurricane-proof glass or hurricane shingles, high velocity rated shingles, these can save you a lot of money in the long run because we are going to have those events. It's not a question of
mm-hmm,
if, it's just when. And we've seen it in Florida. When a storm hits an area that hasn't really built up recently or seen a lot of development recently, you see tremendous damage. When it goes into a place that has and everything's up to code, water floods the buildings, but the buildings are still there. So
mm-hmm.
you can still work with the structure. So changing the codes and building to those, possible extreme weather events can definitely save property in the long run.
You touched on sea level rise already. We wanted to ask about other potential markers of climate change in Massachusetts, specifically along the coast. Do other things come to mind for you on that front?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, especially when it comes to the coast, that we're keeping a close eye on. One would be heavy precipitation events. I think that as the climate warms, our biggest concerns in New England are water related. They're both sea level rise and increasing high precipitation events that can cause more extensive flooding. They can also just stress out our old infrastructure around here much more easily. And we've
Mhm.
definitely seen an increase in these high rainfall events, even high snowfall events when it's cold enough over the last several decades. And so you think about events like the heavy rain that came through, I think it was 7 years ago now. It was a night where we quickly got 8 inches of rain over by Wellfleet, and
Mhm.
cars were going over the bank at the Beachcomber. Uh, the flood events in Vermont, we've seen several times in the last few years in New Hampshire, where you get 8, 9, 10 inches very quickly, and all of a sudden the mountain's giving way. You know, part of understanding the weather is knowing that extreme weather always happens, and there's always been big storms. I mean, you look at the book, and outlining major weather events in the past, but they
Mhm.
can shift, they can amplify. And when we have more rain in a short amount of time or more snow in a short amount of time, that can make a difference. And then the other thing that we've seen at the coast is warming waters. As the waters
Mhm.
warm up, we see species starting to move around, different critters
Mhm.
arriving, different ones leaving. Um, we can see ocean acidification that occurs when there's too much carbon dioxide uptake into the ocean. So that can also affect a lot of marine life.
Mhm.
It also can affect, in a way, tornadoes.
Mhm.
So a question I get a lot is, has there been any shift in tornadic activity? And I think we have seen a little slight uptick starting toward the South Coast. And
Yeah.
the reason that would happen, and maybe happen more in the future, is the ocean is a very good stabilizer. This is why thunderstorms fall apart when they come down toward the Cape, a lot of times in the spring and early summer. The water's cool. So when the water's
Mhm.
cool, the air is cooler. Cooler air doesn't want to rise. If air doesn't want to rise, you're not going to get a big thunderstorm.
Mhm.
And usually we get our bigger thunderstorms more toward mid and late summer when the water's a little bit warmer and you have more instability to work with. So if that water warms up, you start losing and chipping away at that stable layer for a bigger window, which would allow tornadoes to visit the Cape a little bit more frequently. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on as well.
No, and I think you might be right on that because we had I believe it was a microburst, but a pretty nasty one storm come through a couple of years ago, ripped our shower right off the back of the house.
Oof.
Oh,
Yeah.
So that wind just went ripped right through.
Yeah,
But
if
that
our
ocean,
water is getting up to, 80 degrees in the middle of the summer, or at least the shallow water, then that
80
there is no
plus.
stable layer.
There's some
yeah.
days I'll stick that probe in to do some water testing, and 2 summers ago it hit 86 in the shallow areas, and
Yeah.
it was unbelievable. I'm like, we have a natural bathtub right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mm. And we've definitely had some critters popping up. We're getting a lot more stuff from the mid-Atlantic that
Mhm.
started to migrate up. We have a new jellyfish that has popped up along Nantucket Sound that was pretty restricted to the Chesapeake area and decided to come up and basically has established a new habitat up here
Hmm.
that we've been monitoring. But
Yeah,
it's able to overwinter and make it to the next year.
everything's creeping.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Thinking about the possibility or inevitability of another major storm hitting the area, what do you think that people should be doing, if anything, to prepare for that eventuality?
Yeah, that's a great question. When it comes to hurricanes, it's always good to have non-perishable items in the house, because you don't want to be, I know it's weird to stockpile, some toilet paper and water in your house, and you're like, am I a doomsdayer now? Like, you don't
All
want to be
right.
stuck with a closet full of Costco. Or maybe you do, maybe you just like being prepared. But when the time comes, everyone else is going to be doing the same thing. And it's going to be terrible because
Mhm.
you're not going to be wanting to run to the store and trying to get supplies while everyone else is freaking out and going to the store and getting supplies. So if there's a few things that you can stockpile and making sure you have, whatever you would need for a few weeks, think about if I had no power for 3 weeks, what would I do? What would life
Mhm.
look like? What would I want most? What do I want to make sure I have in the house? Is electricity really important to you for those 3 weeks? If it is, maybe invest in a generator if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's certainly a great investment around here because we lose power for all sorts of reasons, not just hurricanes, but strong wind events or nor'easters and snowstorms or ice storms. There's many ways we can lose trees and power around here. So that could be a great thing to do. You might want to invest in some renewable energy source that has, a battery backup. Those are getting better and better all the time. So you won't just have, say, solar during the day, but if your battery is built up, you might be able to get a decent amount of time out of that. It's also just thinking about pathways in your house. If you know you have a water risk, or if you don't know you have a water risk, you should look into it and see if you're close to a flood zone or places that historically have seen high water. You want to make sure that water has a place to flow. Or think about where would you try to block it off if you thought it was coming into your house.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us. We usually like at the end to give you the opportunity to mention or touch on anything that we didn't already ask you about. So is there anything within this realm or other topics that you think our listeners ought to hear?
Can I go on a rant about weather apps really quickly?
Yeah.
Please. I'm very curious.
All right, great. This is my soapbox. Weather apps, they're easy. I understand. We're all busy. I have kids. It's a lot of work to focus on lots of different things, different news items, things for your job, things for your family, all that. Looking at an app, very easy. But the thing is, they stink and they're wrong all the time. And so they're just going to ruin your day and ruin your time. And then you're going to get mad at the forecaster who had nothing to do with the app about the bad forecast. Here's how apps work. Apps take a computer model and they just spit it out onto your phone. So most of the time when I look at a computer model, I'm like, oh, that looks really stupid. That's not going to happen. And I ignore it. Again, the power of ignoring things.
Right.
There's lots of times where there are certain models and a lot of apps will use, say, the GFS model, which is, something the United States runs, and it's free. Free is great if you're an app developer. Awesome. So you're just going to use that. But it's also a terrible model. So a lot of the times it's not going to have good info. What apps are good for are getting warnings. As soon as a warning is issued, if rain's approaching you, like giving you that 10-minute, 15-minute heads up, if lightning's around, these are great uses of an app. Or maybe an app has a video forecast on it that you could actually watch. But at the end of the day, an app gives you, an icon or a little paragraph or a number. And that's not how weather works, especially not here. If you're in maybe the subtropics somewhere, yeah, okay, it's fine. The weather's not going to be all that different from day to day. Around here, weather's crazy. Look at today. We went from a morning thunderstorm to sunshine to 70. Clouds came back in, sun came back out, day was great. Oh, here comes another thunderstorm. Pours. Now it's 48 degrees. Now the wind's picking up. Weather is a conversation. You have to have the conversation with the forecast. It's worth the couple minutes of a day to understand how a day will evolve. Otherwise, I think an app leaves you short on understanding how it'll affect your plans. And to me, my job, what I'm passionate about is making sure people maximize their day and use it to the best that they can. And not everyone's, go get them. You want to make sure you make every minute count. That's fine too. But for me, like I plan my days and my weeks, like here are the hours that make sense to go outside. Here are the hours I'm going to do laundry. Here are the hours that I'm going to plan my indoor activities. And so I feel like every day I'm getting as much accomplished as I can based on what the weather is giving me. That's an option for everybody. Everyone can have that power and have that information, but you do need to have the conversation with the forecaster to understand. The app will never know that your baseball game is on Saturday or your reunion or you're going to the airport and how the weather will affect that thing specifically. The forecaster will. So an app is a companion, but please don't rely on it because also it will put me out of a job and that would suck.
I will never look at my app the same way again.
Good, great.
I think I only have radar scope installed on here.
That's all I got to.
Yep.
Mhm.
And the website linked to the weather station on the Abington High School roof.
Perfect. Yep.
That's all I
The
need.
Radar app is great. Radar Scope is the one we use. It's excellent. We do have a station app, but I would prefer you just tune in. You can also just go on our website. Also easy. A couple minutes, watch a forecast. We're streaming 24/7 over on WBZ.com, and that's an option too.
We'll be
Awesome.
on there. I'll be watching.
Before we let you go, how can people, you just mentioned some ways, but how can people find you, find your work, find your book, all that stuff?
Sure. So I'm on WBZ every evening, so 5 to 6:30 and 8 to 9 on TV 38, and then 11 to 11:30 over on WBZ again. everything we do is streamed for free on our website or on Pluto TV or on our app. So you can just go through any of those sources. Whenever weather's active, we update the app, we update the stream all the time. So it's never stale. You can always get fresh information there. You can always go to a social media channel as well. Just Eric Fisher on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok because I'm old and tired. But maybe I'll get wise and get on that sometime soon too.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Eric. This was great. Enjoyed it.
No, thank you. Thank you.
This is awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to watch Eric Fisher over on CBS Boston WBZ-TV, weeknights at 5, 6, and 11. Want to support the Poppy Water Alliance's work? Check out our new bonfire store, where we'll be selling our 2025 jellyfish shirts in order to support our summer research. Thanks again.
Cape Cod breeze carries us away. Sunset.